Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of the Joint Overview and Scrutiny Committee. May I first remind you of some domestic arrangements. Toilets are situated outside the meeting room opposite the stairs. You just go out there. Cold water is also available in the breakout area outside the meeting room. If the fire alarm should sound, please leave the meeting room by following the fire exit signs and meet on the Ipswich Town Football Club training pitch. Do not re-enter the building until you're told it's safe to do so. Please switch off all mobile phones or turn them to silent. Thank you. I'd like to remind everybody present that this meeting will be broadcast live on the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed, except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you will have been deemed by the Council to have consented to being filmed and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings or webcasting and/or for training purposes. The Council, members of the public and the press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded. Finally, can members and officers and witnesses please ensure that you press the microphone for speaking and turn off when you've finished. Now, I'll introduce, as there are so many of us here, I'll introduce who everybody is. I'm Keith Wellham, I'm chairing the meeting. I have support here from Democratic Services and with people up there who are operating the technical stuff. Here we have members of the committee. We also have other members of council, including members of the CIL committee that's looking into changing that and checking that CIL committee process. We've got cabinet members, we have witnesses, and we have Tom Barker as one of. Are you one of the witnesses, or are you? You'll be, and Christine, who will be. They're here for the CIL item. There'll be other officers who will appear later on who will be introducing or answering questions about other papers. So I'm moving item 8 to the start of the meeting. So, sorry? Yeah. So before we come to the first substantive item, we have apologies and substitutes, please.
Yes, good morning. I have received apologies from Councillor Gall.
And do we have any declarations of interest, please? Can we confirm the minutes of our last meeting? You've all seen, and I hope are happy with, I've seen nods. Can we have a proposal to accept the minutes of the last meeting, please? Councillor Osborne, Councillor Ayres, and all are in favour, I trust. So, right.
Corrections to the minutes,
yes.
Mr. Chairman? Just
yes.
a couple of points that I wanted. One I found I thought should be 9.45, Mid-Suffolk member for Cabinet and the Babergh members for Cabinet. Could I suggest a change that they agreed that both councils had discussed pledging funding for the respective CA for the next 3 years? I think that would be a more accurate statement of their intent. Because it's not actually been agreed by those cabinets, I understand, from reporting to them. So I think we just say that they had discussed pledging funding for the respective.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is that the only change? Oh, Councillor Osborne.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a clarification on declarations of interest. I put declaration on that I am on an outside body for the District Council as an observer with the Citizens' Advice at Sudbury. I'm not a Sudbury councillor that sits on Citizens' Advice. I do it purely as an outside body for the district.
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so with those changes, still got we're still happy. We'll have to go back. Sorry, Councillor McCraw. Can we have a proposal that we accept these amended minutes, Councillor Councillor Caston, you haven't got a nameplate. Councillor Caston has proposed and Councillor Muller has now seconded. So are we now still all in favour, please? Thank you very much. Have we received any notification of petitions in accordance with the Council's petition scheme, please?
And received.
Thank you. Are there any questions by the public?
None received.
Thank you. Any questions by councillors? Any received in advance?
None received, Chair.
Thank you very much. So now we come on to item 8 instead of item 7, which is the Community Infrastructure Levy Expenditure Framework Review. And as I said, we've got members of that review body here, the Joint Working Party. So I think Cabinet Member from Babergh is going to introduce this item briefly, please. Councillor Arthey, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, this is the first review of the CIL expenditure. Sorry, this isn't. This is the second review. In the first review of the CIL expenditure scheme, which Babergh and Mid Suffolk approved in March of this year, members agreed to review the CIL expenditure framework and the communication strategy after bid round 3, and whilst bid round 4 was in operation, so that any amendments to the scheme would be considered by both councils and be in place before bid round 5, which is May 2020. It was also agreed in March 2019 by both councils that the joint member panel who informed the content of the CIL framework and the first review would remain to inform the second CIL expenditure review. The second CIL expenditure review has started, and we had our first meeting of the new joint member panel last Friday. Like the first CIL expenditure review, it is important that overview and scrutiny are in at the start of the process to afford the opportunity to look at how we work with others, particularly parish councils and community groups, but also the infrastructure providers to collaboratively deliver infrastructure within communities. So today we've got with us some witnesses to help. We're called witnesses, that's why I'm sitting up here. But I'm also the Cabinet Member for Planning, of course, for Babergh. So to introduce you to the witnesses, we've got Robin Morley here on my right, who's the Parish Councillor in Cockfield. And those of you who've been involved with CIL over the last year or two will probably remember that Cockfield have been particularly successful in their CIL bids, and I think are a very good example of how CIL can actually help in communities where there's an infrastructure deficit. So they're in need of infrastructure. There are no other ways to provide it, and so they've been particularly successful with their bids, and hopefully Robin will be able to tell you a bit about that. I was going to introduce Steve Holman from Network Rail, but I understand he's been delayed by a train being late or something. So he's not here yet, but hopefully he'll join us later on. I've got James Cutting here from the County Council, representing education and passenger transport improvement infrastructure, responsible for passenger transport and an approved bid in Appendix C. And I'll try and get these two guys right. Daniel, I think, is the one with the longer hair, aren't you? So that's Daniel Turner. And the man with the interesting beard is Chris Crisell from the Clinical Commissioning Group, responsible for the extension to Bottersdale Health Facility, where there was a CIL contribution of approximately £99,000 towards a £500,000 project. I'm sure you've picked all of this up from your papers. As I said, I make the introduction as one of the two Cabinet leads for planning, but also as a member of the joint member panel, both in its first iteration and in its current form. And of course, I've also been involved as the ward member for a number of parishes, including Cockfield, where they've successfully bid for district CIL funds. The report that you've got in front of you gives you background information on the timescales for the joint member panel meetings, the dates of the two all-member briefings, which are coming up for all members of both councils, the first one being on the 25th of September, and gives you details of the approved bids for both councils and some learning points since the last review. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do the officers want to add? Sorry. Do the officers want to add anything to that? Members, are you happy if we go straight on to hearing the witnesses, or do you have any questions of what we've heard so far? Are we happy to go straight on to hearing the witnesses? Thank you very much. So our first witness is Robin Morley, who is Parish Councillor for Cockfield Parish Council. If you could press the button so your red light comes on, that's great. So when you're ready, thank you.
I'm pleased to be able to come along and put a parish perspective on this CIL payments. As a parish, we've grown about 20% in the last 2 or 3 years, and we're quite a rural village, quite a spread out village, but we've always tried to be active. We've gone for local needs, and we've tried to provide for the school and the shop and try and improve the infrastructure. But we've found it quite difficult with finance over the years. We've always spent our 106 as it's come along. We've put our precept up considerably to try and improve things, whereas a lot of parishes decide the best way is to keep their precept down, which I don't agree with. I think you need to go to the people to improve for the village, and we've been very active on that. Clive is our member, and he's been excellent, I have to say, and we're not just backslapping various people here today, I hope, but Clive has been excellent because when the CIL job came out, he encouraged us to go for it. He explained the process, he told us what that would apply to, and we looked into it. And so we've put in various bids in various rounds, and we've been successful. We've bought 2 pieces of land, one about 3.5 acre piece from the diocese for allotments. Very protracted, I have to say, dealing with the diocese, but we did get there and we bought it, and that's in a really good spot for the village. We've also bought a similar amount of land which is for amenity, dog walking within distance of the school for the kids, and we bought that as well, and that was off the Suffolk County Council. Part of that was to include a bit of disused railway line, and there's an old Victorian twin culvert there, and we bid for that to have some work on that. So that's going to be restored into the bargain. We've also put in a bid for refurbishing the village hall kitchen to extend that and improve that, and again we were successful with that. So we've been quite diverse and looked at various projects rather than just look for one big figure. And I think that's where CIL has been really good for our community. As far as dealing with with Babergh, we went through Christine Thurlow and Harad Firth, and we found them again to be very informative and cooperative with our bids. And so really, just to sum up, we've been successful with bidding for about £58,000 over the 4 bids, and it has spread and it's done really well for us. But I think, and I dare say you will review how you're going to distribute CIL, but I would ask you not to forget the communities, because the communities are changing quite quickly in certain areas with increased housing. There's a change within the parishes on how things are carried out. There used to be a lot more, shall we say, local community work. Now money does talk in a lot of cases, and I would urge you to support the local communities, because if we're going to continue to grow and prosper, we do need support with money.
Thank you very much. Yep. Thank you. Anybody got any questions of Mr. Morley? Or should we... Councillor Mellon.
Thank you, Chair. So as a parish council, you've had quite a bit of development, so you would have got your 15 or 25% automatically. I take it you don't have a neighbourhood plan?
No, we don't. So we get 15%.
The 58,000 you talked about, how much of that is automatic? How much of that is the bidding into the other CIL pot, the 1, 2, 3 pot?
Could you just say that again, please?
So out of the figure you gave us, how much of that money is money you got automatically, and how much of that was the bids into the other process?
Well, what we've been given is 58,000, and we've put in 40,000. So that is via precept, some outstanding 106 money, and a small amount of our own CIL money. So, and what we're looking to do with our ongoing drip-fed CIL money, we're looking to do a project on some play equipment where a lot of the development is going to be carried out.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay.
Sorry, can I just add?
Yes, certainly do.
Just to be clear, with the Cockfield bids, they actually mopped up all of their outstanding 106 recreation contributions, so they've all now been used. As Robin said, they used some of their precept money, so they used some of their own budget. They used some of their own parish CIL, and they topped it up with CIL from the district pot. So it actually came from a range of sources, if you like.
Thank you. So our next, Clive, I think you are our next witness. Have you got anything that you want to say now as witness?
Not too much, you'll be glad to hear. But the first thing that I'd like to say is that people who are trying to access CIL funds, the very best thing that they can do, is that not on? Yeah. The very best thing that they can do is have a word with Christine and her team. Everybody that I've spoken to who's been involved in bids, in my current ward and my old ward before the review, they've all said how useful it's been to get advice, help, guidance from the CIL team. In Preston St Mary, where they were looking at a village hall extension, Christine came out to one of their evening meetings. I know that Anne Howard went out to Cockfield to have a look at the various schemes that were being proposed there. I know that there were some people that struggled initially with CIL, and I would say that one of the things they should have done is that they should have spoken to the CIL team. There's guidance available on the website. That's been revised a little bit since its first format. But the thing that I think is most important is that if you've got something that you're thinking about, have a word with the team to see if it's eligible, have a word with the team to see what other funding might be available. Certainly in community projects, you can get help with things like outstanding 106 and with other sources of funding, because we don't want to delete our CIL pot with projects that should or could be funded from elsewhere. And lastly, it's not really as a witness comment, it's more as a cabinet member comment, but I would like to congratulate Christine and ask her to pass on our thanks to all of her team, because the setting up CIL in the short time frame that we had for the original framework was quite a challenge. It worked really, really well. Christine and the team put in a huge amount of work to manage meetings at very short notice. I think we had about 6 meetings over 3 weeks. We're now on the review, and Christine is attempting to do a similar thing again. We're on our next review, and that seems to be going okay. We'll find out when we come to our next meeting at the end tomorrow, isn't it, Christine? But it's a lot of work involved trying to sort all of this out, and I really would just say to Christine, please send on our appreciation to all of her team.
Thank you. Shall we move on now to James Cutting from Suffolk County Council?
Thank you, Chair. My name is James Cutting. I'm Head of Planning at Suffolk County Council. My team deals with Section 106 and CIL infrastructure bids, and we liaise with other colleagues within the County Council in terms of bringing those projects forward to fruition. The committee may already be aware that the planning practice guidance states that charging authorities should work closely in setting priorities for how CIL is spent. And we are already doing that with Babergh Suffolk. We have regular monthly or sometimes weekly meetings with the CIL team in setting out how projects are going to come forward, and working together on programming the projects and the stages that they're at, and then after we are obtaining the funding, when those are going to be delivered, so that there's good communication going backwards and forwards. I would highlight that we need to be careful that what's set out in paragraph 49 of the report, which is, of course, I largely agree with, but we don't add additional bureaucracy to the overall process, and it has to be focused on the different stages in delivering infrastructure, being not another chance to go over the merits of a particular project or some of the other details. There are different stages throughout the county council's process, where there are engagement. There are opportunities for engagement through the CIL process as well, but there are stages where decisions need to be taken, and at that point those need to be made, and the CIL process shouldn't be a rehearsal of some of the other details of decisions that are taken. But we're largely working through the programs that we have got, and we're working through the points that we are finding not necessarily difficulty with, but when you're moving to a new process and when you're engaging in different forms of infrastructure, there do come questions from local communities and also from officers, and we are working on and addressing the points that are raised, and our regular meetings that we have to do that. But in setting out a new structure for CIL expenditure, we just need to always have in the back of our minds not to make the process too cumbersome and bureaucratic. The relationship between CIL and Section 106 is changing. Changes to regulations now mean that the charging authorities must set out where they're anticipating the funding for different types of infrastructure to come from, and what's known as double dipping, where you have to spend CIL money and you can't charge for Section 106. That has now come to an end, but we still need to be quite clear about where we expect developments to be contributing, such as to new education infrastructure or the relocation of schools. In terms of schools as well, projects that start through basic need funding, so the funding that we get from government to offset the cost of background growth, not additional growth that's come from housing, but population change. Some projects start through basic need funding, and then because development has occurred after that funding has been secured, we're including some additional places. So the structure of the expenditure needs to be mindful that there is this funding pot and from government, and that CIL expenditure is a part of it. The only other aspect that I would highlight is, whilst we are highways and education, we're also the lead local flood authority, so there will be opportunities for water management and flood alleviation as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Councillor Grandin.
Thank you, Chairman. Does the CIL money provide sort of the extra things that, on top of government central funding, the sort of nice to haves, or do you have, and are you instructed, are there rules on how you spend the money? Is it, or does it go on fundamental things, provision? How are you able to spend the CIL money as you wish, or on the nice extra things to have, or are you finding you're having to use it for the more central, fundamental items in those areas? Hope you understand what I mean.
No, they're fundamental. With the bus stops, for example, there are certain standards that we have, and it's a pretty standardised format. And also with education infrastructure, it's a pretty standardised product that you're producing. You're not gold-plating taps. There are some aspects that from government funding and the way that the Department for Education produces its guidance means that we do need to put some additional resource into different forms of design that allow us to maintain the school for a bit easier. And there are very different technical details that go into the different funding pots. For CIL, there is, yes, greater flexibility, but we have to justify it. And as long as we can understand and provide that justification at the right time, then there shouldn't be any problem at all.
Thank you. There's a question, I think, from Councillor Field.
Thank you. I have to say, basically, I think the things in my county division that got built out so far are probably 106 funded, but nevertheless, we're getting close to CIL. And these processes have taken an extraordinary amount of time. One thinks you can put up 400 or 500 houses much more rapidly than you can put up a school extension. But nevertheless, things get done. The thing that concerns me, sitting in on planning meetings and things always, is that my impression is that the total CIL available from a number of these developments is less than the cost of putting up a single school extension. In other words, to me, it looks as though the amount of money is grossly inadequate. I wondered if you'd like to comment on that.
Thank you, Councillor Field, for allowing me to provide that opportunity. Yes, we would of course like to see a better relationship between the amount of money that's coming in from development and in fact the cost of providing the infrastructure. This is one of the reasons why we say that new schools and early years facilities should be funded through Section 106, because the cost from CIL, I think no matter where you are in the country, is not sufficient. I do know that your officers are reviewing the CIL levy, and that will be in line with the local plan review. But of course, the spectre of viability does come in for schemes that we are not able to completely rely on CIL. We will also be looking towards justifying it through the government basic need funding, and if we can't get that, then it comes back to using our own reserves, which is not something that the county council is able to do throughout the county. So that the aspect that I think this committee needs to be aware is that CIL is there to provide a lot of flexibility for infrastructure, but for some critical features that are absolutely necessary to provide sustainable development, the Section 106 is still a much better source, because you're making that direct relationship between the development and the amount of money that you're expecting. And it is then not such a drain on the CIL pot, so the CIL expenditure can provide for some of the aspects that the local community would want to see as a benefit from development, not just as a necessary outcome from development.
Thank you. Tom Barker, did you want to add something to that answer, that reply?
Yeah, just wanted to come in on that point, and I think due to the complexities of the whole system and the way it hangs together, the relationship between Section 106 and CIL and the recent changes to the regulations, it's probably not kind of possible in this committee to rehearse the whole argument, but I do think it's important to recognise that CIL does allow for some balancing out. So there will inevitably be some applications that come before planning committees whereby the infrastructure requirements are going to cost more than the CIL that is generated from that particular development. There are also inevitably applications that come forward and which are granted that make a CIL contribution whereby there isn't actually any infrastructure call, there isn't any call on those that money that is generated from that given development. So, for example, we wouldn't be able to collect any money for infrastructure from developments of 1 to 9 dwellings through Section 106 for education and all kinds of things like that, whereas CIL does make a contribution for every single dwelling house that comes forward on a square meterage. So it both constrains some of our activity but also gives us more freedom and flexibility and opportunity to generate money beyond what we would otherwise be able to generate through Section 106. So there is some balancing out in amongst it. And it also provides the opportunity whereby, and I'm not disagreeing with James, I think there is Section 106 does give you certainty, but Section 106 also requires you to forecast ahead and use various formulas and expectations. So 100 dwellings will generate X number of school children. Well, under Section 106, you make that forecast and you secure a given amount of money for that. Well, if that 100 houses actually generates 20% more children who need to go in schools, your amount of money is fixed, so you don't get any more through that process. If it generates 20% less, then theoretically you've got more money than the demand actually required. So CIL allows you to understand what the actual impact is once you're determining what the cost and the infrastructure required is, rather than having to kind of forecast ahead 5 years sometimes and guesstimate what is going to come from a given development. So there's give and take within both approaches, and I think some of the changes that have recently happened to the regulations give us more flexibility, and it's incumbent upon officers and other colleagues to work out how best to use the range of tools that are available to make sure that we are able to facilitate the kind of optimise the contribution towards infrastructure from any given development.
Thank you. Councillor Mansell.
Thank you. I'd just like to ask that a bit of confusion on my part, perhaps, that it's the Suffolk County Council education infrastructure people who comment on a planning application to say that there needs to be an extension to the local school. But if that local school is not in county council control, it's an academy, is it the academy you have to apply for the CIL money, or what is your relationship with that education provider that isn't controlled by the county council anymore?
A good question. We still retain the overall strategic function in those cases. So the role that we do in responding, because it's my team that responds to planning applications, is when something comes through, we can get the facts and the figures from the education colleagues. If we identify that there's a need for an extension, our education colleagues go and talks with that academy straight away. We also do the same process for local plans. So if a local plan is allocating a site, we need to have an extension to a school. We secure the agreement from the academy, and that's come up actually in several inquiries with inspectors. That has gone, have you got an agreement from the academy? The process then for bidding is with the county council, and we work alongside the academy in which to submit the bids. The academy is effectively then the project manager, but we are securing the funding bid, and quite often academies do appreciate the experience that our education team has got, and they don't have the skills in-house themselves in order to deliver infrastructure projects such as that.
Thank you. Councillor McCraw.
Thank you, Chair. James, I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. One, I noticed that in the introduction to you, it references the bids for bus stops. But of course, from the impression I'm getting is we're not really talking about Suffolk County Council primarily focusing on bus stops. Those are fairly small ticket items. I hope, therefore, services that will continue to be in service. I found an abandoned bus stop the other day. Lovely, beautiful, brand new bus stop, no service. However, putting that aside, I'm getting the impression now we're looking at larger ticket items, but possibly not the full ticket items that would be normally dealt with under Section 106. How large a sort of bid do you anticipate Suffolk County Council having to put forward on CIL? And do the proposed changes in the framework meet your needs in providing that infrastructure?
Thank you, Councillor McCraw. I will avoid the bus routes issue, but it's an understandable shot. But I will remain on that point. If you're putting in infrastructure, that doesn't mean that something can't occur later or can't have some other function. But we are working on targeting the right bus stops in the right places. In terms of the scale, I don't have to hand on top of my head the scale of the forthcoming funding bids in total, but we are looking at projects of multiple millions. In some cases, so we're talking 4 or 5 million for an individual project. So it is big scale, and when it relates to the development that has occurred in that area, we can justify the requirement for that scale of funding. I'm sure your officers will comment on this. The critical thing is to be able to project manage that expenditure. And align it with the costs and the commitments that we need to make. So we can't go out and procure someone to go and build some infrastructure if we aren't certain that we're getting the funding. And we are working on that process. And of course, there may also be delays or in certain projects through whatever reason, and we can alert your authority to that delay as soon as we can. That can you're able to program your expenditure a lot better.
And just to follow on, how does the proposed framework meet your perceived future needs?
I will reiterate the comment that I made at the start. We need to make sure we're not making bureaucracy. So the framework does meet our needs, but what we can't have is the framework functioning as a point where the merits or the specification of a particular piece of infrastructure then get fully rehearsed at the point in which we are applying for the funding. That needs to occur earlier on in the process, and if we're providing an expected program of infrastructure to both authorities, then we can work through and identify at which stage those decisions are made and how much engagement that we need to take for those different infrastructure items, so that we're answering those questions before they come to the CIL funding stage.
Thank you. Councillor Fleming, I think you had a question.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. My question relates to, I expect you all can guess what my question will be about the expenditure on bus stops. I think the matter has been raised. But I would just like to say that just looking through the papers, the immediate thing that struck me was £46,000 has been allocated, for instance, to bus stop improvements in Stowmarket. Now, of the 7 routes coming in and out of Stowmarket, 5 are, considered vulnerable by the County Council and will probably stop functioning come November. And I see repeated instances of
money, which is very scarce these days, being put into fancy bus stops and shelters, when the real problem is we don't have the buses to serve them. Does our CIL framework allow us to try in some respect to remedy this situation?
A bus service may come on in the future, whether if it becomes viable for whatever reason, or if there's changing in funding. You would then need to be having those bus stops put in place. There are also existing services that will flow along routes, and that investment will be made on bus stops along those routes as well, in order to encourage more people to be aware of the services and use them. It is a challenge, and it's one that my passenger transport colleagues are working on, to target and be more precise when they are putting in the request for funding at the planning application stage, that it is relating to a bus service. But that's at the planning application stage, and as Mr. Barker was pointing out, things do change, and CIL provides us with that degree of flexibility. So it is a stage in which we can review, and that the framework does provide us to ask for different bus stops, for example, or remove those that we had previously requested.
Thank you. Did you have a follow-up question?
Yes. What's happening to the money that has currently been allocated to bus stops that won't be either adequately served by buses or served at all? Because there's quite a lot at stake.
I can set out, if the committee does wish, our process in writing. But what we are focusing on is getting that bus stop infrastructure to relate to development and the services that we will expect there to be. When we do review the services, sometimes that is after the decision has been taken for putting in the money for the bus stop, which is regrettable. But we are working on aligning the future requests for bus stops to the services that we are more certain are going to be existing in the future.
Thank you. I think we're in danger of losing track of what we're really here to discuss. Tom Barker, did you have another question? Point?
Yeah, sorry, Christine may have been seeking to make the same point, but I think it is important to recognise that CIL, the Community Infrastructure Levy, is a mechanism to secure money for hard infrastructure, not ongoing revenue costs. So I think your first question may have been alluding to whether CIL monies could make a contribution towards supporting those subsidised services that are being removed. It can't. It's only the physical infrastructure itself that it can provide for.
Thank you. Christine.
Thank you. Yes. Responding to earlier comments that James made, it's very good to hear that the work that we've been doing collectively in terms of collaborative working has been producing a programme, and we've been devising how we can deliver infrastructure projects where we've seen growth happen. So it's important to get those started. I think there is a balance to be struck, however, between James's comments about not wanting to add more bureaucracy into the system. I totally understand that, but at the same time, from our point of view, the CIL Expenditure Framework only deals with bids where they come forward, and as we've been hearing today, there is an awful lot of work that happens before a bid is submitted, and where we're spending, or could be potentially spending, multi-million pounds on different projects. I think there is a need to make sure that we have the correct governance and processes, but our ambition there is to make sure that whatever is put in place through the CIL Expenditure Framework works as effectively as all the different governance arrangements that all the infrastructure providers have. And I think as well, with the review that is now started and is ongoing, we've got to respond to the fact that we have a joint local plan which has growth, we have an infrastructure delivery plan, and we have now a policy LP 31 which focuses on infrastructure provision, and it's the infrastructure that is important to the communities in terms of delivery. So everything that we're working towards is to make sure that happens. I think the other thing we need to ensure is that when we're spending CIL, we must make sure that we have best value for the money that is being spent. So again, you know, there is a reason to look at these things and to work collectively with our partners.
Thank you. Are you happy now that we move on to the next speakers? Is it going to be a double act, or Daniel Turner and Crystal, whether you're going to both speak? That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So my colleague Chris and I, we are here representing the Clinical Commissioning Group. As the Commissioners, we are responsible for the commissioning health in the health across Suffolk, and we also have a secondary function for responding to and dealing with the planning applications and bids for CIL and 106 monies, primarily to date for primary care, so GP contractors. We've developed a very good working relationship with Christine and her team, and have been heavily involved in commenting on the local plans and also developing a pipeline of work that we can put forward through the CIL process. As you can see in the report, we had a successful bid with the Botesdale project. This was a scheme that's been worked through the health system, which is quite an arduous process to get funding through. Get closer to the mic. Sorry, I'll lean forward. So yeah, the Botesdale project, we were successful in £98,000 of CIL money. This went a long way towards a £500,000 project for the Botesdale Health Centre. It allowed us to create 5 additional consulting rooms, an additional meeting space, which not only helps the local population with the growth they're having, but also allows the GPs to bring in other services. And I know the large meeting room, they're looking to develop closer relationships with the local hospices and create more of a community project. GPs in particular are a bit of an anomaly in the health system in that they are private businesses, and NHS funding, we are only allowed to fund a certain proportion of development work, which means that GPs have to establish the cost for the rest of it themselves. So where we're able to secure CIL funding towards that, not only reduces the burden on the NHS, but also on the GPs, costs they have to put in, which means they can look at providing more money into actually running the business rather than development of the infrastructure.
Hi, I'd just like to say that as a planning officer and planning support manager for the CCG, we've been working very closely with Christine's team and worked on the infrastructure development plan. And as part of that, we've been able to look at the proposed development and to look at how we need to develop our strategies and our premises around that. But as my colleague was saying, these GPs are private businesses, and so as Mr. Curtin was saying, that with the academies and things like that, we have to go to them and they have to be supportive as well, and it's not as easy. We don't have control of the development in the term. We can only advise, and then they have to then make a decision based on whether they've got the funding or whether we can get funding, and that's where the CIL process comes in very helpful, because it's able to take some of that burden away from the surgeries, and we're able to discount that amount off of we have to pay a certain amount, NHS pays a certain amount, and the surgery pays the leftover. But what the CIL does is take that amount and reduce it. And so by working through that, we're actually able to get schemes that would never be able to go ahead in the first place, because a lot of the surgeries don't have the funds available for large schemes. So the CIL is really, really useful for that.
Thank you. Could I just ask, with that project, was there a sort of a community element to it? I mean, it's CIL, Community Infrastructure Levy. You weren't just, what was provided was not just provided for medical or GP reasons. Was it, or is there some community space within there? You referred to community in your presentation.
So primarily the space has been built to alleviate the growth in population for the GP practice, but the GPs are quite forward-thinking, and as I alluded to, they are looking to engage with the community and look at how they can use that space in different ways. So they are engaging with the hospice, and they run groups for mothers and babies, so it should create a versatile space.
Thank you. So it does have a community element to it as well, so it can be used by the community. Tom?
Just as a point to clarify there, I think for the avoidance of doubt, the provision of GP places is perceived to be community infrastructure. So in the same way as CIL bids could provide for new school places that wouldn't necessarily provide for dual use facilities for the wider community or anything like that, education infrastructure is community infrastructure. GP practices are community infrastructure, so it doesn't necessarily have to have a supplementary element that provides for meeting space or community drop-ins or anything like that. The space itself would be appropriate without those other ancillary things. So that just to clarify that point.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm just getting the feeling that if there is a community element to a bid which is primarily for something else, like Stow Upland High School, there was much made of all this. There are community elements to this development, and so that should help us get the CIL contribution. But that, what you're saying is it would be relevant without any reference to any use by community for any other purpose. Thank you.
Thank you. This is probably for Christine or Tom. So of that 98,000, how much of that was Bottisdale's own pot, and how much was the wider community pot?
The money came out of the local infrastructure pot. It didn't come out of any ring-fenced funds, and it's been our only health bid so far across both of the two district councils. And when CIL went live, that project was quite well developed, and it was an opportunity really for health to apply for money for something which the people in our parishes would have been travelling outside the district quite some distance in order to get palliative care. But we understand by providing everything that has been described, it's allowed our residents to not have to take that journey, make that distance.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Fielder, then I think Tom wants to. Do you want to add to that? Thank you.
Sorry, just to supplement that answer, I guess one of the things that this review of the framework can usefully explore, I think just reflecting on a few of the questions, is that relationship between the 15 or 25% that goes to the local community to spend on infrastructure, and that bit that stays with the district council to be able to allocate, and the way that we develop the relationships with our parishes so that there is a kind of collective contribution to infrastructure that is important to a particular place. Because I think probably too often it's been a sense that the district pot has been used and the local parish have also had a contribution from their local CIL that hasn't necessarily gone into a particular item of infrastructure. I guess with the GP surgery in question, that could get complicated because it will serve, I don't know, 15 parishes, possibly more. And so who contributes and how might get a bit complicated. But part of this review will explore that relationship between the local contribution and the district contribution and how they both, which I think will become increasingly important, particularly where there are more neighbourhood plans, where 25% of the money is going to those local areas. Those local areas, there are some parishes that I think probably now received in excess of £100,000, and that can make a significant contribution towards multiple people all putting their hand in the pot and kind of growing the overall pot, getting in external funding, those kind of things. So that absolutely needs to be part of the process that we're in now.
Christine, do you want to add something? I mean, we must go to several members then.
Just one thing. That is a subject which is going to come up at the CIL member group, not only tomorrow, but the third session that we intend to have. So that very much is on the agenda. Thank you.
Councillor Field, I've had you next. Thank you.
Yes, just to the NHS. As you point out, the clinical commissioning groups are private businesses. I just wondered, once the infrastructure is constructed, does title remain with the NHS or does it become the property of the lucky GPs?
The clinical commissioning group is part of the NHS, so it's the GPs who are the standalone businesses. It depends on who owns the estate. As I say, GPs are unique in their position within the NHS, that some of them own their own buildings, some lease their buildings privately, some lease them from the NHS. So depending what the ownership of the building is, will depend where the ownership lies afterwards. If the GPs own their building, they will own the asset at the end. There is a way that the NHS abates reimbursement on that so that we don't pay twice.
Thank you. Councillor McCraw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, I don't know if Councillor Field was finished, but as I understand it, because this has been a perennial question in terms of infrastructure provision, and in the past people have always asked, if you haven't got a GP surgery in your village, the question every time an application comes forward is, can we have a GP surgery? And you have to make the explanation that they have to want to come. From what I understand, you're suggesting that actually for the first time we have a direct method of a mechanism to bring a GP or make a GP coming to a particular community a little bit more likely. Is that a fair assessment or a fair summary?
Thank you. It's a difficult point. There is a shortage of GPs nationally. NHS England hold the reins on giving out new contracts for GPs. So it's really working with the assets that we've got. We can make the improvements to increase provision, which will hopefully be more attractive to recruitment.
So in fact it's just somewhat theoretical at the moment because fundamentally it needs to be, something needs to be there already.
Yes.
That's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Mansell.
Thank you. I'd just like to ask about the amount of money that you got from the CIL pot, which was just shy of 100,000, slightly less than 20% of the whole project cost. And I'd just like to know whether that figure was the same or similar to the amount of money that we're told at a planning committee is needed for the developments in Bottisdale and its surroundings towards the GP provision. I mean, is that a similar amount of money? Is that what was should have been earmarked from developments, less than or more than? Because it's only 20% of the total project.
To that.
Well, I can offer some comments to that. So this project that was brought forward by the NHS at the time was not something that was responding to a planning application. It was responding to a deficit in need of GP facilities in that area, particularly as I understand it with reference to palliative care, but my colleagues behind me will correct me if I'm wrong. Initially, the project started off with us being asked for half the money, so £270,000 was the original CIL bid. However, through a process of looking through the business case and understanding what was being proposed, there was quite a lot of equipment and telephony and other matters involved in what we were being asked for. It's important to remember that CIL is only used for infrastructure, it's not used for equipment. And so therefore we negotiated a situation where we could fund 20% because those were the eligible items, and that was sufficient still to land the project.
Thank you. Councillor Mansell.
Can I come back on that? I mean, we are told when we're determining planning applications that the NHS has asked for pots of money, a certain amount of money to for the local primary healthcare provision. You know, are any of those coming forward? Because clearly Bottisdale isn't the only place where there is currently a deficit without the extra burden of the new development. So it's very interesting to know that they've applied for some CIL money and got it, and yet all the ones that are deemed to be needed due to the development that we're getting haven't yet applied for it.
Right. Who wants to go first?
The answer is yes, there are other schemes coming forward. As I say, the NHS process for getting a scheme through is very long-winded and complicated. So we are proposing to put more forward for CIL bids. It's just lining up where the projects get to the right stage with when the bid rounds come through.
Thank you. Tom?
Just conscious that I believe colleagues here are from Ipswich and East CCG, so just before you get into any forensic questions about I'm conscious that facilities within your area, within Woolpit, Thurston, Elmswell, and that general area would be the West CCG. So I don't want these guys to feel put on the spot in terms of understanding particular schemes when they're actually in another CCG area.
I wasn't going to go into specifics.
Yeah. Right. I think we've covered this topic, the CCG enough. Can we? We've got one more witness who has arrived, and that's Steve Holman. So can we hear from Steve Holman, please?
Thank you, Chair. I was delayed by train, ironically, working for Network Rail, but it wasn't in Anglia, so there you go. So thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to your members. I'm the business development lead for Anglia route in Network Rail, and my job is to deliver third-party funded projects for Network Rail to work closely with our partners in local authorities and the private sector to bring forward investment in the railway. Anglia happens to be one of the highest performing routes in Network Rail in terms of securing externally funded projects. So in the 5 years to 2019, we secured £415 million worth of investment on our railway network in Anglia. Our target for the next 5 years is £450 million, and we're working very closely with officers and in local authorities in particular. We're working on 6 HIF bids, which are multi-million-pound bids across the region. We're working on a number of CIL applications and too numerous to mention Section 106 applications. So we're geared up to work with your officers in delivering externally funded improvements or enhancements on the railway.
Are there any? Councillor McCraw.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. As a keen user of railways, I'm aware that they cover a large number of local authorities. So when you're actually applying for putting bids together, are you producing bids for multiple authorities' CIL funds? Are you separating them out, or are you just looking for the location where a piece of infrastructure might be particularly placed? In other words, does one authority bear the full consequence of a CIL bid?
Councillor McGraw, thank you very much. Typically, we work with groupings of local authorities. in relation to bids. Some of these bids are very large, multi-million pound bids. So if to be honest with you, it tends to be on the larger bids, a grouping of local authorities or LEPs or combined authorities. But on smaller pieces of infrastructure or smaller improvements, that might be a single authority that we're actually working with.
Thank you. Any more questions? So are we happy now to progress to debating where we take this and what we can come to recommendations and so on? So who wants to kick off? Right, Councillor McCraw.
I do apologise. I think I warned one or two members I might say something. This is, and again, I'm going to echo something Councillor Arthey said. One of the first things that new councillors elected in 2015 dealt with was the preparation for the launch of the eventual CIL structure. And I remember Christine at the original explanation to us ignorant councillors. To be fair, everybody was a bit ignorant of CIL in those days. We were still learning, and it was the preparation that is now paying off, because this is the third stage of the bidding. And I have to say that as the processes, this is the second time it's been to scrutiny. This is the second year it will have been through the work. I forget if it's called a working party or no joint member panel. Got it now. But the whole process, the process of the bidding and the changes and development of CIL is exactly what was predicted all those 4 years ago. Because at the start, it was foreseen that we would start off with relatively local bids based upon individual communities, and that's perfectly typified by Robin over there with bids for Cockfield. And the early stage of bids, it's also typified by the smaller scale bids of Suffolk County Council, for example, bus stops. And it's clear, as was suggested, that eventually the CIL pot gets bigger. We're going to have larger projects. We're going to be dealing with other sources of funding, and they're going to get more and more complex. And that's the reason why this framework needs to develop. Now, fortunately, we've been given some flexibility in the 1, 2, 3 lists. So I commend the work of Christine's team, commend the work of the member panel, because it's fairly obvious over the process, and I'm talking a 4-year process now, that the process has been well planned and that we're as well prepared as we can be for something that's fundamentally a wide open, how long is a piece of string question. There's so much to this, but it answers a lot of questions that weren't being answered elsewhere. So just those points, throw them into the pot, because generally speaking, I think this is a nice piece of work. Everybody involved should be commended.
Yes, I agree with that. I've got a couple of queries. You have reports back of how much has been spent of the CIL money that you've given out. Is that roughly on track of how the rate that you would expect it to be spent? I'm not talking about the rate it would be allocated, but once the money is allocated to a particular parish council or whatever, are you happy that it's being spent at the sort of rate? It's not being hung on to, so the infrastructure is coming into use very quickly. That's one query. And I have another query around the infrastructure development plan. In 4.8, I think it is, it talk about, well, the first is, was there consultation on the infrastructure development plan? How often is it reviewed? Is it reasonable, as you suggest here, that parish PIPs, the projects within parish PIPs, should align to the infrastructure development plan?
Okay, so in terms of when we allocate money, are we spending it? You'll recall that all CIL bids have to be oven-ready schemes. And by that, it's meant that they have all the necessary formal approvals So everything is ready to go. If you look at appendices B and C, you'll see that a lot of the projects are started or well underway. I only know of one bid in particular that's stalled because of a party wall issue which needs to be addressed, and another bid which is being reviewed. Other than that, the progress on all of them is moving forward. So from a delivery point of view, that seems to be working very well. In terms of the infrastructure delivery plan, we worked on that collaboratively with all of the infrastructure providers. In fact, all of the people that you see here today are the people that we've been working on that document with. It is a collaborative piece of work. Before we published it in July, we had 5 iterations of that, because as fast as you hone one element of work, you need to then look at another, and some of these things tie into each other, which mean that you need to go backwards and forwards. And of course, what's also happening is that this doesn't happen in an arena where there's no change. Change is happening all the while as far as infrastructure is concerned. So in terms of how many more iterations there will be, I think there will be as many as we need to do in order to keep pace with growth as it goes forward. It is an iterative, live working document. Obviously, we're not going to change it every week, but at particular stages alongside the local plan, then it would be our objective to make sure that that document is as grounded as it needs to be to support the local plan. As far as the planning infrastructure investment plans are concerned, as you'll recall, this was a document. It's an informal document. It has no statutory basis. There's no reason why parishes need to fill this out. I think when we launched it, we said it was really a conversation starter in order to understand what ambitions local parishes had in terms of the infrastructure that they needed. And it was to bring us a little bit closer together with the infrastructure that we were providing for those communities from a strategic point of view, as well as understanding the local priorities. And we are continuing to work on that basis with parishes to understand what's important to them. And it's not all about what can be delivered through CIL. There are other external funding pots that can be used. There is community grant, there's external funding, there's parish precept, and it's about trying to assist parishes with signposting as much as with active delivery. Whether those projects, where they do strike a chord with the IDP, then they would clearly play into it. And as Tom said earlier, the conversation really about where we've got a lot of now developing neighbourhood plans with a lot of money which has already gone out through neighbourhood CIL, there's every reason why we need to talk about how we can deliver things.
Thank you. Can I make a plea? On page 24 and 4.9, it says effective communication with the parish and ward member at an appropriate stage. Can I make a plea that this isn't something for the district, it's something really for the county to take on board? We had a very unfortunate incident in here yesterday when a planning application, which really probably should have been approved, was not, because the ward member wasn't aware, and the ward member could have given some guidance to those who were promoting the project, and where there was a conflict between the county and the parish, that could have been avoided if the ward member had been kept informed. So a plea really, you need to involve the ward member for any big project. It's not up to the CIL team to do that. I think it's up to the infrastructure providers to keep ward members, both county and district ward members, fully involved, because they can probably help you see the project through rather than hinder it. Thank you. Councillor Scarf.
Thank you, Chair. Page 26 relates to the method for the collection of the monies for the CIL regulations 2010. It reminds us that those parishes that have a neighbourhood plan receive 25% and those that don't receive 15%. The regulations, are they prescriptive in terms of the cap for parishes that do not have a neighbourhood plan, because there is a £100 per property allocation, and so that is ring-fenced at that, rather than 15% of the total CIL monies. So are the regulations prescriptive, or is that something that the district has adopted?
Christine, I think that's an easy one to answer.
Yeah, they are prescriptive. We have no discretion over that.
Are there any other comments? Oh, sorry, I didn't see. Sorry, Councillor Grandin.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I probably should have asked my question earlier at the previous stage, so I apologise for that. I'm not sure if it's for Christine or for the Network Rail gentleman, but with the rail type CIL monies, we, as far as I can think, in Babergh only have one railway station. And is it looked at when you look at the applications, how much it's going to benefit the people in the district? It sounds like we're talking about quite large sums of money. But with only one railway station, we're not that well served in our district in this aspect. So how much is it actually benefiting, and do you consider that aspect?
Councillor Grandin, thank you for that question. The station you're referring to, could you just let me know which station that is? Sudbury. That's an interesting station, Sudbury, because it's connected to the Great Eastern Main Line, of course, at Markstay. So we at Network Rail deal with a lot of proposals to build new stations, which are quite expensive, or to improve stations. We have to take into account the benefit to all railway users, so passengers and freight. That's particularly important in Anglia, the freight usage. So we do look at the benefits of that sort of station improvement or a new station in terms of the benefits of the people in the immediate area, but we have to balance that against the potential disbenefits to other railway users, because, as I think someone else mentioned in relation to bus stops, a station's only as good as the services that are actually stopping at that new station. And so a new station will have an impact on other users and the timetable for those users. So we take into account the immediate geographical benefits or costs, but also the much wider impacts on the usage of the railway. And we also have to look at the impact of any improvement scheme, for example, a station, but it could be something else, in relation to our long-term planning and our medium-term planning for the railway. So we are not focused in on just the immediate beneficiaries of the station. We have to look at the wider impacts and benefits on the railway system.
Thank you. Tom Barker.
Just to supplement that answer, I guess worth reminding councillors that bids that come forward for rail infrastructure are likely to be greater than £10,000, therefore they're not delegated to officers, therefore they would come to Cabinet for a decision on those CIL bids, and I would imagine that it would be part of Cabinet members' consideration to understand the impact and benefits for their residents in agreeing those CIL bids. So it is a decision for Cabinet, and I would anticipate that Cabinet members would reflect on the benefits for their residents, balanced against wider considerations that the infrastructure provider themselves are making as part of any bids.
Thank you. Councillor Field.
Thank you. I too forgot to ask a question of British Rail representative. Wonder if you'll indulge me. I was just going to check whether there's any independent audits of your estimates of cost of rail infrastructure improvements. I'm particularly mindful of I think the Thurston thing, when I was on the planning application, an underpass to take a footway from one side of the railway to the other was guessed at £1 million, and I say guessed, it was a very early estimate. I believe that estimate is now £5 million, which seems, you know, an almost HS2 type level of increase, perhaps even bigger. And obviously, it's awfully easy to make silly guesses about what those sums should be. Just question is that just your own staff that produces those estimates, or is it independently audited in any way?
Councillor Field, thank you. So I think there's two parts to that question. In terms of the governance that projects are subjected to at Network Rail, we have a process called GRIP, that is shorthand for Governance for Railway Investment Projects, which is a gateway, a stage gate decision-making process. There's 8 stages to each project. And we use that to manage and mitigate risk for the project, all types of risk, performance, cost, safety, and so on. And that tool is embedded in Network Rail's way of working, and it's also connected to our internal governance procedures. So we have a panel, an investment panel at Anglia, that scrutinises all projects during their life cycle and during the GRIP life cycle that that they are subjected to. I actually sit on one of those panels, and we review the work of the project sponsor. That includes externally funded projects. So the short answer is yes, we have a very robust governance process and investment control process. And that's important for projects on the railway. They do tend to be a bit more expensive. And that it allows external funders to see transparency about the risk management and also where the accountability lies for those projects. So that's the first answer. Coming back to Thurston, I do know that project reasonably well. I have been working with your officer, Christine in particular. The 2 values that you mentioned were for 2 different types of project. So the £1 million estimate, which is in 2014, wasn't for a footway tunnel. It was for works to bring the footway under the railway bridge in a safe manner. Whereas the estimate, which I think you're referring to, of £5 million, is to actually construct a footway tunnel through the embankment. So I think there's 2 slightly different. That would explain the difference in costs on that particular project.
Thank you. Councillor McCaw wants to speak. Then I think we need, as a committee, to decide what we're going to put forward as our recommendation.
Thank you, Chair. It was just actually on that point, would a CIL bid in such a case not be required to be oven ready and therefore have been through a full examination by our CIL team? Is that correct, Christine?
With the different regimes that the infrastructure providers have. So we're well aware of the GRIP procedures.
So that's pretty much part of this review process already?
Yes.
Thank you.
It's the conversation we're having.
I think that clears the point remarkably well.
Thank you. So now, has anybody got a proposal that they want to put forward? We've got some recommendations here which we can either take or we can completely change. I think that there is a feeling that we want to commend the work of the CIL team, as well as just note the contents of the report. So, Councillor McCraw, do you want to put some words together?
I just thought there were a couple of things that were worthy of noting, in that this has been a part of the process that we've been looking at methods for CIL to be first the bidding rounds. That was something we largely dealt with at our meeting last year. The 6-monthly process, the refinements that have been added to the CIL process. I'm hoping that people making bids have found that that has improved the experience for them. But the second point, of course, is the second part of this, the purpose of this review, is to improve the framework for the disbursement, the spending of the money. And I think in both cases, it seems clear to note that the process is working as it was intended to do. And I think it's important to make that it's visibly improving. And we're not just noting that, we can actually say that we can see that the work has been handled well, that the process is improving, and it can continue to improve. And the only other thing is does this committee wish to take a further report at some future date? But those are the two recommendations I'd add.
We need to put a timescale to a report back. I mean, I personally don't. I think that the team will come back to us when they feel that there are changes which will need to go to Cabinet and we should have a look at beforehand. So if we can put some sort of words into what Councillor McCraw has said, that we understand, or we commend, we can, oh, you've got some words, brilliant.
A fit and proper process has taken place in both aspects of CIL, and I think that's the purpose of a scrutiny committee, is to see, examine as to whether a fit and proper purpose has taken place, and I think we can say quite clearly it has. Can we use some words on that, Henriette?
Do we want to agree every single word, or are you content that after the meeting we'll put those words together in a couple of sentences? And if that is the case, we have a proposal. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor. Right, and is everyone in favour of that? Thank you very much.
I say thank you for that endorsement. When we set off on our original CIL framework, when we did the document, it was very much on a suck it and see basis, and we knew that it would need review and ongoing review. So you were very much part of that process, and thank you very much for all of your input, and rest assured we will take all of your comments into consideration. Thank you.
Shall we just have a minute or two to allow those who have attended this item and don't wish to stay for the rest of the meeting, that they might like to move away? I saw...
Chair, could I propose a
Thank you, members. We're just about to resume. We're now moving on to item 7, which is the route changes to waste collection. And Ollie Fairs, who is the corporate manager, is going to briefly introduce this. Can I say right from the very start, we've all had lots and lots of emails and telephone calls. What we don't want to do is to go through them, any of them, certainly not all of them, because we're all aware that there have been problems in some areas. But what we're trying to do is to find a way forward, not to look back and say just how bad it has been for Mrs. Jones up the road. Is that okay? Thank you. Ollie.
Thank you, Chair. So before you today is the report on the round changes. On the 15th of July, we went live. I've included in the report the background information to give some context as to why there was the need to do that, and that mainly revolves around the housing growth we've seen. I've gone through the comms approach to the report, how we went about it, what the lessons we could learn from doing that in the future. Generally, the communications approach worked very well. We had just a handful of return flyers, and once we got over the first week, really very, very few queries regarding what days the new collections were to be made on. I've gone through the implementation phase, what happened when we went live, and there's some statistics in there around missed bins and call handling. I've got some latest information for you on missed bins. As of this morning, we had 48 outstanding missed bins. Call levels have now resumed to around 100 a day, which is back to normal levels. And average wait times for the last week on calls were 2 minutes and 9 seconds, which again is all back to normal levels. Lastly, there's I've tried to summarise what we did and lessons we can learn moving forward. So hopefully that's that in a nutshell. Chair?
Thank you very much. I mean, what we can do perhaps to help Ollie and the staff in the future is if there are any other lessons that we think that we picked up that they could have learned and can implement, then that's helpful. Councillor Grandin.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the report's extremely well written, very clear, and lists all the information I believe that we need. I think it's a very good report. I think the whole move over to the new days, I think, has moved very smoothly and was very well organised. In my area of Hadley, I have had no one report to me any concerns. There may have been concerns, but I haven't had any reports of such. I think the whole thing has been handled extremely well, and I'm also glad to see that we're not bearing the costs for it. My only concern in this report has been the call waiting times, because to me, that should have been a predictable situation, and it should have been an area where you could have brought in, it could have been mitigated by bringing in extra staff just to cover that period. And the week beginning 22nd of July, it appears that you had around a 15-minute wait time, and I think that's unacceptable, particularly when it was probably predictable that would peak then. So that was my only concern, but I think the rest of it has been handled extremely well, in my opinion. So, I'd say well done, apart from that aspect. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to respond to that, Ollie?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I have to agree that did catch us out, really. I mean, over that period, we supported our existing call team with other members of staff from the waste team, and we didn't have any holiday booked during that period. But the level of calls, yes, that did catch me out, I'm afraid, and yeah, in hindsight, I would have had additional resources there. Yeah, absolutely, yes. Take that totally.
Thank you. I'm going to take questions from members first, and members of the committee first, and then others after that, if that's okay. I think I had Councillor Haddingham next and Councillor McCraw. So, Councillor Haddingham.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I have had a few problems, but you've always dealt with them very efficiently and quickly, and I want to say thank you for that. But what I have had is some people from the my parish council saying, why can't all recycling be national? Why is it different in every district? Wouldn't it be simpler if everyone could just recycle and put glass in their bins like they do in Norfolk and stuff like that? And also, could everyone have a sticker? Because with the new Tetra packs that you now can't throw out because the recycling's going elsewhere, that lots of people are still just, you know, throwing them out apparently, and just, even if you tell them they shouldn't, they think they know better. And anyway, leaflet drops, I think at least once a year, about what they can and can't put in would probably be a good plan. Or a sticker that they could actually put on the bin to remind themselves and their kids and everyone else that's using those bins. But also about the national thing.
Yeah, I think there was an opportunity. A flyer was coming out. There could have been a bit of a reminder on the flyer. But that's easy with the benefit of hindsight.
So, yeah, thank you, Councillor. In terms of the national strategy, that is something that government is looking at the moment. There's some consultations out to look at having a much more wider generalised recycling scheme across the country, because you're absolutely right, it really does vary very much from district to district. In some areas, at least within Suffolk, we have a totally consistent approach, and the glass in or out of a bin confuses lots of people. So, yes, a more consistent approach is something we as officers would welcome as well. And in regards to communicating that message about what we can recycling, especially after the changes, yes, that is something we can look at. As a bin stripping campaign, none of this is cheap, unfortunately, so it is always that balance between cost and benefit, and generally most people do get it right. A lot of that information is available, and we can provide it to be included in parish newsletters. So perhaps there's other ways we could do that rather than, you know, a universal postal campaign.
My 6 parishes, but it's but like I say, it's still getting the message out to people that don't look at those things.
Thank you, Chair. Ollie, I noticed on page 15 of the report that 528 missed weekly collections at the peak, and that's referred to later on. However, looking at the customer contacts in the period, we have a peak of over 2,000 phone calls. Now, I appreciate some people are going to phone more than once, and some of those phone calls will be missed, but the 528 figure at peak, falling eventually to a figure of closer to 158 or even 94, depending on which figure I take, that's the ones you know about. And my question is, have you had any method of feedback by speaking to the new binmen, the rounds? I've heard of one road, hamlet, that was completely missed off. I'm not going to go into the details. That's for you to deal with and your team. But one complete hamlet apparently was missed off the new routes. And I know I informed you of some cases where a whole street didn't get done. Now, familiarity with the rounds will get rid of some of these. But have you taken any feedback from the collection crews to see what their perception of this has been? In other words, in order to feed the process back from their experience into your usage of their workload. Do you understand what I'm suggesting? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. I mean, that feedback is constant. That Serco's crews will be feeding back to their management, and they will be feeding that back to us. In a lot of cases, they will come and talk to us directly. You're absolutely right. They're the guys that are out on the ground delivering this service, so they know what looks right, what doesn't right, where things are where things are missing. So we've managed to create a data set now of where we collect from, what we collect. But as with any set of data, it's not perfect. Bits are missing. Roads have dropped off systems, and as you suggest, a hammer. So all of that feedback is constant, and that goes to improving the system and making it more robust moving forward.
Thank you.
I understand also there were some informal local arrangements that disappeared when a crew moved somewhere else, and that was a real shame, because obviously they didn't have the opportunity to let the new crew know that that old lady round the corner, she tends to forget to leave her bin, but it's just behind the gate there. That sort of stuff is actually human, and, you know, it's a human business.
Speak.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It's actually to get back to Councillor Grandon's comment on the length of the telephone calls. I'm given to understand that when a resident actually booked or identified and logged on to the online system and said, I've got a missed collection, they then rang to find out or to confirm whether or not that request had been received, which indicates to me that when they completed the necessary fields online, they didn't receive something to say, thank you for your request, it will be attended to immediately. And that, in turn, would have reduced the number of calls coming through. Maybe not by a lot, but it would have had an impact when you've got a funnel situation. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Caston, I've got next.
Yes, it's in regards to the telephone calls, the 15-minute waiting time. Have we collected data on when the peak times were of those calls? And is it possible that we could have some kind of callback arrangement when it goes quiet, maybe in the afternoons? I'm assuming that the people would be, the main waiting would be done in the mornings when people realise their bins haven't been collected and they're looking for information. Could we have a system where we tell them one person deals with them and they get a call back later on to just spread the waiting times across the day?
Thank you, Councillor. Our call system we use is excellent at data capture and will allow us to analyse data. I'm not an expert on it, so I don't know at what level it would enable us to do that, but I certainly take your suggestion on board, and yes, that more of them, to be able to flatten out those spikes, perhaps with a message would have been helpful. Again, I think what we've witnessed here is a once in a generational spike in calls to the waste office, and business as usual. It's a very manageable, steady 100 calls a day that, you know, sit quite nicely throughout the day. So, yeah, business as usual, it's very manageable, but I think moving forward, a lesson to be learned for anybody that's doing something like this again is going to generate a lot of calls. Yeah, that'd certainly be something to consider.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor McLaren.
Ollie, I didn't receive any complaints from any residents. However, from the parish councils in Storworld were about the efficiency and the capability of the vehicles being used, because they reported a lot of breakdowns during rounds, and then the vehicles had to go back to wherever and sometimes didn't return. And the question was being asked, are the vehicles fit for purpose? Because they felt that the amount of waste being collected was in it perhaps more than was originally in the original rounds.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. It's quite a difficult one to answer in terms of the vehicles are certainly fit for purpose. That is what they're designed to do, and the bulk of our fleet, their 16-plate vehicles, are relatively new, so they are generally very reliable. However, saying that, it doesn't mean that they don't break down. They do an awful lot of work and there's spare vehicles available. And during this period, we've had spare crews as well, sort of on standby, if you like, to mop anything up. So, yeah, that is a bit of a surprise to me that crews' vehicles broke down and nobody appeared again.
I'll highlight the village that had the most comments, which was Stutton, which impacted on Holbrook, because I'm not sure where the route was, but I think it sort of made its way to, the crews made their way towards Holbrook after Stutton, and I think it was them that were actually getting the, you know, the result of the vehicles having to go back, and it was more than once and twice, because they mentioned it.
I guess that you've got some feedback on where the vehicles might have broken down, and in your review of how it went with the contractor, I guess these sorts of things will or already have cropped up. So I guess that you'll be aware of that. But you did have vehicles and crews on standby. So if there is a problem, then I would hope that that's already been flagged up and it's all been dealt with. But you know, I had no complaints at all in my patch. I had one query about why do we see vehicles in our village more than one day a week, but that's because that's how the rounds have been reset. But absolutely no problems at all. Councillor McCraw.
Just to note that the report covers 7 weeks to the last week of August. I just wonder what improvements might have taken place since this report was prepared, or the period it covers. Has it continued to improve, and in what ways?
Thank you, Councillor. So, as I alluded to earlier, mis-bins, there's, as of this morning when I left the office, there was 48. Calls have reduced now back to normal levels, hovering about the 100 a day, which is business as usual. And call waiting times, the average last week was 2 minutes and 9 seconds, which again is back to normal levels.
Thank you. Councillor Mansell, you had a query.
Thank you. Now, I would just like to perhaps elaborate on Councillor Haddingham's comments about the communication that went out to residents, because I do think that there was a missed opportunity that the one that's on our website, the thing about how do you do your recycling, could have been incorporated into the leaflet that was telling people they had a change of collection day, because recently I've had a lot of queries and saying, why can't they post anything? Why can't we get a list of what goes in the bin? We're just putting everything in the grey bin, which is something that we certainly should be discouraging. But I think that was a missed opportunity, and it's a pity that didn't go out at the same time, because that would have been then funded. We wouldn't have to pay out again to deliver to a load of houses. But it's interesting that the only people who got the information were the ones who had a change to their collection day, which in your report was 65,000. I wondered what is that in proportion of the number of households, because I've got no idea how many households, and presumably that's across both districts, because although there were people who had a change of collection day, there may have been others who had the same day, but because the rounds had all been changed, instead of being picked up at 7 in the morning, they were picked up at 3 in the afternoon. They may well have complained and not actually been aware of the fact that there were any changes at all. So I just wonder what the proportion was that they went to the houses, and whether it wouldn't have cost that much more to have told everybody that there was going to be some changes, and what you put in your recycling bin.
Thank you, Councillor. The 65,000 that had a day change, that was out of a total of approximately 84,000. We debated whether to send everybody a flyer. It's interesting that where a few did hit the mat, and we told somebody that their day was the same as it already was, we received complaints about what a waste of money. Yeah. So again, we discussed it. We felt the leaflet we sent out was very to the point. You know, your collection days changing, then the collection calendar on the back. We had 2 sides of paper available to us, and we took a decision. But I absolutely take it on board that any opportunity we could get to get that recycling message and what goes in the right bin, we should be doing that.
Councillor Osborne, I've got next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, first of all, can I just say that the amount of calls that we had weren't very many, and however, having then taken them on board, we then rang Ollie, who responded exceptionally well to all the problems we had. The one question I've got for him, which also from the previous speaker, is about the way that the recycled and general waste is dealt with. I'm afraid it's not good in Sudbury in terms of I've over the years had to keep repeating to our Serco or our waste management that they're not doing what you were asked for, and therefore some of those bins are not collected because the bins will not be emptied if they're in the wrong bin or there's been what they call it, infiltrated with waste which shouldn't be in that bin. So I agree with Councillor Mansell at the back that we do need to clarify a little bit harder with some of our residents, particularly around the Sudbury area. I speak for that area, because a lot of bins get left because of the way they've been either not recycled or put to general waste. But all of that, I much want to thank the waste team for what they've done. I think that's excellent work. Thank you, Ollie.
Yes, thank you. I've got a few points to make, but in general, clearly, you've got through this once-in-a-generation thing very well, so definitely commending you and one of your team, Hannah Bridges, I was just looking her up, who's responded very well to several of my inquiries about missed bins. I think the thing is that when people had a missed bin and they reported it and they didn't feel confident that that's when we heard that there was a problem. You know, it was sort of 2 or 3 steps down the line. But in general, obviously, those have reduced to almost nothing now. So I've got a couple of points. There's a question about the routing of the calls. When people were pressing that option for the waste management, I understand that all those calls were going through to Stowmarket, where there wasn't enough people to cope, and how quickly was that sort of rerouted so you had extra people to help? Then again, picking up on the sort of multiple reports thing, where you've got a street that's been missed and almost everyone is ringing in, and it didn't seem to be the confidence that they were getting the feedback that something was happening. I think the point that Councillor Malvisi made. So that's an area where I think the feedback somehow needs to be improved. We had an issue in one of my villages with where the green top bins were missed, and then a week later the recycling was collected with the other rubbish, which I know we've had an email back and forth about, and I think you told me then that was sort of pretty much a crew on their own initiative just trying to clear up. But then we've had other reports of that elsewhere, so I'd like to know how much of that went on, and was it definitely kind of road crews doing that, or was it something that happened perhaps more often than we'd like? And then lastly, there's a question on the crews. Obviously, I was used to seeing the same crew come round in my village, and they knew the village, that kind of local knowledge thing. When you redeployed to the new routes, did we make sure that was maximised, that people were, as far as possible, kept in the same area so that local knowledge wasn't lost?
Thank you, Councillor. I'll deal with the recycling being put in with the rubbish bins. That certainly isn't something ever sanctioned, something yes, just goes against everything we're trying to achieve. And I'm afraid that during this process with the volume of bins, there was a few incidents raised where that did happen. I mean, moving forward, I wouldn't expect to see it at all. Have on the back of this looked at our own processes, so when we flag up a misbin, we are flagging up really clearly the commodity it is, so there isn't room for error. I wonder where it wasn't so clear before. Guys were seeing a misbin report, not knowing what they were going to collect, so emptied any bin they saw. So off the back of this, we have tightened up on how we process information. With regard to your second point, that knowledge sort of sat within Serco's operational crew and teams, and I would have expected, and I know they did share some of that knowledge, so spread out some of the crews across patches where they could, you know, where you had this local knowledge that you would have otherwise lost. I think probably it could have been handled better, and that could have been spread out more, undoubtedly. I think a lot of the issues we've had and seen are those little bits of snippets of local knowledge that only the existing crew might have known. And yeah, some of those did get lost along the way and has caused issues that might otherwise have been avoided.
And on the routing of calls?
So, as I alluded to before, yeah, that massive peak did catch us unaware. You know, I'd have to put my hands up to that. It was all hands to the pumps during that really busy week, and calls did get lost and, you know, unacceptable waiting times. So again, with hindsight, and if we ever do anything like this again, you know, absolutely, we need to be cleverer about how we deal with calls.
Councillor Moses, is this a response to that question?
Oh, it's a general point of information.
Right.
So you can come back to me if you want.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
I have Councillor Caston next.
Well, Councillor Mallon's kind of covered my original question, and yeah, and a good explanation of that. But I'd just like to say that, like, to do the changes on this scale, okay, there has been disruption, but there hasn't been an absolutely huge amount of disruption considering the size of these changes. And these changes have made what we're doing there more efficient, more environmentally friendly. They've, you know, it's fantastic what we're achieving already with our waste services for the cost to the residents and how it works. We've made them even better doing this. We're using less fuel. We've got vehicles driving less distance to go to different routes. It's really good, and I think I feel a bit of sympathy for you, sort of being in front of Scrutiny, answering questions on 15-minute waiting times on telephones, and when I think we've got to say that this overall has been a great success. It is regrettable. No one should have to wait on the phone for 15 minutes, but that's changed now. It was a lot of disruption, but to deliver such a big change, you know, good job. You managed it very well.
Yes, to put it into context, I was talking to somebody and they said, oh, well, at the worst point of your changeover, that was so much better than we get week by week in our area. That was a different part of the country. So, yeah, you've got to put it into context.
Just a very short point on that very point. If you were one of the 528 missed at the peak, it was 100% failure. If you were one of the 83,500 people who got their bin collected, it was 100% successful. It's just a matter of perspective.
Thank you. Councillor Haddingham, did you have another point?
Oh, yes. So it's just a bit of possibly gossip, but we just got an email this morning saying that some of the people might be being put up in the Holiday Inn.
Yes, that is correct. Yes, so there's some relief drivers that Serco brought in to cover this period to mop up additional missed bins and just to be there as a catch-up crew. Yeah, they brought them in for their Milton Keynes contract and they're staying at the Holiday Inn in Claydon. No.
Might add, at Serco's expense.
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you. Councillor Osborne, I think you had a query.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I'd like to endorse what Councillor Caston said. I was going to say that myself, but you beat me to it. But no, absolutely endorse that. The other thing that it raised as part of this change in process was those properties that have been given planning permission that are down a lane where the refuge collectors can't get to for whatever reason. So could I just take this opportunity to put in a request, please, that when a planning application comes forward for properties to be built mainly on backland development, where our waste services put in comments to that planning officer in regards to accessibility from our waste collection vehicles. I've got a case in Sudbury where an elderly lady lives down a track which it takes her about 3 minutes to pull her bin right up to the end of the track. It goes up a hill, so when it's bad weather, it's icy, she's already slipped over a couple of times. We cannot access her house, so she's been told that she can either bring a black sack up to the end of the track or she can bring her bin. So obviously that's one that's been and gone, but if we could address that in the future to make sure that comments are put forward to the planning officers on the accessibility to those properties in regards to planning applications coming forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Did you want to respond to that?
I'd just like to say that my officers do look at all planning applications and we have an opportunity to comment, and obviously to be able to get a refuse truck to the bin collection point is fundamental to us being able to deliver the service.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Malvesi next.
Thank you, Chairman. Picking up on Councillor Osborne's point and Ollie's point, when you look at a map, you might think that's fine, we can get the vehicle down there and done. But the difference between looking at a map and dealing with the reality of a farm lane or a rural lane, and I think Councillor Osborne's point is very, very pertinent moving forward on our environmental agenda, because we do live in a rural area. We do have isolated people who are isolated, and unfortunately many of them tend to be older and less able to take their bins either down the track or up the track. So we need to consider that in the entire planning process. I think that's terribly important. I concur with everybody else in respect of the report that's been produced. It's very good, and it was a very good service. And we will be having to revisit this because we are building houses. So in the years to come, I'm sure we will have another. But we've been through the dummy run now, and we've learnt from it. And I think we also have to take it on to be aware that this took place in an unprecedented spike of heat, which we as a nation are not very good at handling. So if your bin's not collected and it's 30-odd degrees and you can't open the front door or the back door because the air coming in is hot, tempers get a bit frayed and expectations are maybe a little excessive. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
I've got Councillor Grandon. Is there anyone else? Councillor Scarf after Councillor Grandon. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I was only going to say that going back to the implementation of the new rounds, I think it needs to be really, even though we've talked about where things have gone wrong, it's actually such a small percentage. And I think it can and should be regarded as a very successful change that you've made to a service that, for some people, this is how they see their council tax being spent. It's the most important aspect of the council tax in their view, because it's something that they feel they're paying for every week. And it's the most important thing, most visible thing that gets done with their council tax as far as they're concerned. So it's very important to everyone. So I think the percentage where things have gone wrong is very slight, really, in the overall picture. So I think the service and the implementation of these changes really needs to be commended. The other thing I want to say is that we're very lucky in that we have such a good service, having been to other parts of the country and other parts use services in Europe. And I hope when you mentioned earlier in your introduction that there may be changes because of looking at how things are done nationally. One thing I and many people like about our particular service that we have in our district is that it's very simple. It goes in one of 2 or perhaps 3 bins, and it's simple. And that's not the case throughout the country. And so I hope that it's more likely that other parts of the country will move to a system that we have, rather than us having a more complex system. So I hope that you may recommend that our system works successfully and that we don't have to adopt a more complex bin system, because also not everyone has the space in their garden or wherever to store large numbers of bins. And once it becomes too complex, the system, I think, could become less successful. Thank you. But I'd like to commend the way it's all worked.
Thank you. Councillor Scarf, please.
Thank you, Chair. In the financial implications then, all the direct costs associated were covered by Serco, but as always there are indirect costs which presumably would have been covered by this council, which we won't be able to sort out. I think Serco have probably learnt a lot from the exercise, and I'm interested in the phrase business as usual. In your financial implications, there's no penalty at the moment for Serco. There will be in the new contract, but surely a company as large as Serco, business as usual always involves changes to collection rounds in different areas. So I'm wondering whether we should be looking at penalties within the new contract that would cover this kind of situation, because it appears to me that we could go through this kind of situation again and the financial penalties currently in the new contract would still not apply.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. So the set of KPIs and SLAs that we've negotiated into the new contract do cover things such as misbins. So for not responding to a misbin, there would be a financial penalty that isn't in this existing contract that runs until 2021.
But there'll be no financial penalty if in a changeover of bin routes, because that will be something which is an abnormal week or two, I guess.
We enter into this arrangement as a partnership, and it was widely recognised that there would be disruption. So, yeah, that would not be business as usual. So, yes, we would suspend normal business as usual penalties during such a massive change for a reasonable amount of time.
Thank you. Councillor Malvesi.
Thank you, Chairman. Coming back to Councillor Grandon's comment about the simplicity of the system here in Babergh, mid-Suffolk, it very much recycling is dependent on volume, and I talk albeit a long time ago, I actually worked in automotive waste. And automotive waste was waste oil and bumpers, and how you could recycle them. And you think bumpers are made of plastic. Well, they're not. They're made of a huge range of different polymers. But the benefits of recycling are hugely dependent on getting the volume throughput. And I think that whoever decided the system for this area of the country was very far thinking, because where I lived in Warrington, surrounded by industrial towns, you were able to split your waste streams and get the volumes. Whereas what you've done here is you've been able to identify recyclate that is not dependent on high volumes, but you've got a system of taking it in and turning it round to the benefit of the community, which I think is to be commended to those who had the vision and the foresight to implement the system that we have.
Oh.
Yes, I just absolutely agree with Councillor Malvesi. I think the more we can keep it simple, especially in a largely rural area, the better. And I know that Ollie and the Suffolk Waste Partnership are working hard on that point as we respond to the government's it's white paper on waste, isn't it? A consultation on the future of waste in this country, which is a really important consultation, or series of consultations. I'd just like to reiterate my thanks to the team, and to say how thank you for the relative overall great success of this change, which obviously there have been a few glitches. So well done. I think the areas where things went a bit wrong were largely a human factor issue, and there's always a human factor, and that's where, the human factor is important. We don't want to be a fully automated world, so, a few mistakes here and there, it's worth a little bit of pain to know that, another year or so we'll recognise our bin men and be able to say hello to them and, maybe remember them at Christmas or whatever we're not supposed to do there. Also, on the paper, in paragraph 7.1 on the risk, I just wanted to query the highly probable and very high risk of failure of long-term service delivery due to increased housing growth. I'm not sure that I'm not on the committee, but that I would agree that there is a high probability of failure here, especially given the performance we've just seen and our capacity to adapt. Just one more final thing I wanted to say was that when the MRF, the material recycling facility, reopens, which will be quite soon, won't it, Ollie? Yep. That everyone will have a chance to go round it and see it in action, and it would probably be a good opportunity then to put out some sort of flyer to everyone announcing, the fact that we've got this new facility, any opportunities for public interaction or, visits to it, and to, restate the types of recyclables that people can put in their bins.
Thank you. I'm taking Councillor McCraw and Councillor Muller after Councillor McCraw, and then I think we need to...
Just a point of information, I suspect that the likelihood and impact on the risk management was actually if we had not carried out the review, and relates to the process that was existing under the old system, we would have been then in danger of it being highly probable that there would have been problems. And in fact, what we've had now, compared to the problems we would have had we tried to continue, I suspect we would have had a very high impact, much greater than this temporary blip.
You're probably right, yeah.
Councillor Muller.
Thank you, Chair. Really a question for Ollie. We used to produce a monthly magazine for Cedars Park residents. We know we're going to do it on a quarterly basis. I know that Councillor Wellham, they produce one for Stow Upland. Bearing in mind, quite a lot of councillors here have mentioned the fact that reminding people about what they can recycle in that. would you be prepared perhaps to let us have an article which we could put in that magazine, which would go around, certainly on seat as part of 2,000 residents, as a reminder? Sort of thing.
I would certainly welcome the opportunity to do that. That's a fantastic way for us to get information out to residents. So, yeah, just an open invitation. If anything we can do to help you get information out there, yeah, we will. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think if that's in the form of as I say, a flyer or something that can be also be put on parish websites, that would be excellent. I'll take Councillor Warboys because he hasn't spoken yet, and then we're going to move on to try to come to a recommendation.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I'd like to thank Oliver and his team leader, David Atkins. I had a very pleasant interaction and courteous phone calls with you, and the problems I had within Gislingham Ward were dealt with very quickly. I was particularly pleased where follow-up calls and emails were made, because I thought that personal contact with people who were already feeling a little bit frustrated was very important. I do need to apologise on behalf of one of my constituents who made I think, from his report, an unpleasant phone call to you. I think your operators must have had quite a stressful time dealing with these, so they have my sympathy. I think all the points about sort of the collections in the ongoing system have been dealt with very effectively, and I think your report is really very, very good. I think the recycling issue is going to be a long-running debate on whether it's going to be split or further or debate. And I take the councillor's comments about the throughput as being very important. And there's two things that sort of just nag at my mind. There's sort of diesel lorries. I mean, the environmental aspects of actually using diesel to power the collection obviously is a problem itself. I think they do about 7 miles to the gallon. So perhaps looking at alternative power systems in the foreseeable future might be interesting. I think there are schemes run in Scotland. The second one is the sort of benefits of outsourcing the drivers to Serco. Is that having partners or keeping things in-house? Would that not simplify things?
That is a matter that has been debated, and Overview and Scrutiny have had a look at the best way forward. And I don't think we can return to a debate about whether we should move the service in-house or we should contract it out or continue to contract it out, because that debate has already been had. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. So, is there anyone who would like to suggest something more than the Overview and Scrutiny panel notes the report? I think we can at least thank them for the report and commend the work that the waste management team did in handling what we have called, and we believe to be a successful introduction of the new bin collection routes. Councillor McGraw.
Can we suggest that the learning points from this experience be forwarded to SLT for future projects that might have a similar range of changes? And I think the reason to send it to SLT, senior leadership team, is that they are likely to be here for longer than any of us can be sure we will be here. And after all, if we're talking about once in a generation, okay, can I put it, their longevity is perhaps more predictable.
Yeah, that's reasonable. And there may be other changes to the way services are delivered, which there may be something from these learning points that can be used in another part of a different service. So if we add that, I mean, were people generally happy with what I said at the start? And then we also add that learning points be forwarded to senior leadership team. Are people happy with that? Is anybody prepared to propose it? Thank you, Councillor Haddingham, Councillor Grandon. Thank you. And are we all in favour of that, please? Right. Well, can I thank you very much. Can we just thank you, Ollie, for coming along immediately from your holiday, and thank you for the work that you've done, and take our thanks back to the team. Thank you very much. The officers are on the way to talk to us about the information bulletin. Would members like to have a have a talk around the way the work plan, the future work plan, because I think Councillor Ayres has got something to report back on one of the items that we had considered for the work plan, and if you'd like to give us a report back on that, then we can perhaps look at the work plan very quickly and see whether we may need to make any alterations to either work plan.
Right, thank you very much, Councillor Wellham. We had a really good positive meeting on Monday, and so much so that we've got the next 3 meetings planned and booked. They're the 9th of December, the 9th of March and June the 8th. So that is all up and running. The main things that we found out were that we need 3 transit sites, and there are 330,000 travellers in the United Kingdom, and funding is available here to help with transit sites. We didn't elect a chair or a vice chair. We'll do that at the next meeting because we're all looking through the terms of reference, and so they're going back by the 30th of September, and so then that will be agreed. And we're going to invite people from the various travelling communities, because there are quite a few different sections, to maybe gain knowledge so that we have a greater knowledge and understanding, which I feel we should have. We have a new manager for Suffolk and Norfolk called Ashley Grant, and hopefully he will come to the next meeting. West Meadows, which is the Ipswich site, has actually been sold by Suffolk County Council, and they have bought it themselves. So that's no longer under Suffolk County Council. The basic sites we're looking for would just be fencing and water. I don't know if Lavinia's got anything else to add.
Not really. I'm very, pleased that everything seems to be moving forward, and that, very enthusiastic about it.
Thank you. So I'll come to Councillor McCoy in a second. If we look at page 57 for the Babergh work plan, and I think it's at page 59 for the Mid-Suffolk work plan, we see that there's 2 items down there for October on each joint meeting. Councillor McCraw, what did you want to say?
I just wanted to confirm that we don't need to carry on any further investigation into this subject, that it is being dealt with by the working, what is it, working party or steering group? I can never remember what the titles of these things are, but whatever it is, it's being done. We'd just be duplicating. Yes?
It wasn't in our work plan anyway, so we're not going to put it in the work plan. Has anybody got any comments on the work plan? Well, we have down 21st of October, possible continued scrutiny of CA. Is it still just possible? We're not.
I don't think we've done with it. I think the question is no, we're certainly not done with it, because what we're now at the stage of, and both chairs will be contacting the other constituent councils today and tomorrow. The report out of our last meeting has been prepared, it's been put together, initial contact has been made with officers, and now we are getting down to forming some sort of task and finish group as discussed by this committee and as part of our recommendations. Should the chairs discover that it is necessary to bring it back to our next meeting, we've kept it on the agenda. That may not be necessary because it may be supplanted by the task and finish group. And I think that might be the way forward. But if it isn't, we still have it down on the agenda. It can easily be removed.
Yeah. But if that isn't, if we don't bring that back to the next meeting, we only have one item on the agenda. We don't want to delay that item, but we will be meeting for just that item unless anything else crops up in the meantime. So I don't think we can bring anything else forward. So I think the work plan is how it is with the possible continued scrutiny of citizens' advice, but if the timescale needs to be, if that needs to be brought back later, it can't be much later because decisions will have already been made, but that will need to be reported back at some time, even if it's a report back that we've failed to encourage sufficiently other districts to join us in a wider joint scrutiny. Is that fair, Councillor McGraw?
Yes, I think that's exactly the point. It's quite possible that we may have something to report as chairs or the working party. Sorry, I can't call it a working party. I must call it a task and finish group.
Yeah.
Only council can set up working parties. We'll set up a task and finish group, at least that's the ideal, and it may be that we can report back on that on the 21st of October.
And just to finalise things around the work plan, did anyone see anything on the forthcoming decisions list that they felt needed to be put into the work plan? I personally didn't see anything there.
Councillor Mellon, I think I'd like to say something.
Sorry,
Councillor Mellon.
I don't know if that's the right point to raise, but I understand there was a call-in that John Matheson has initiated, and that hasn't appeared on the work plan.
No, there was a call-in, a request for a call-in from Councillor Matheson. It was supported by a sufficient number of other councillors. It was discussed, Councillor Matheson and I and the Assistant Director and the Deputy Monitoring Officer discussed that, and the Deputy Monitoring Officer was not persuaded that there were sufficient grounds for a call-in, and so the call-in was, or the request for a call-in was unsuccessful. I have taken on board some of the matters that were raised in the call-in, and I have spoken with the leader and the deputy leader about the reasons for the request and the wider reasons around of the request, and to try to avoid other requests along similar lines. So although it wasn't called in, I think some progress has been made as a result of the request for the call-in, but if it had been a successful request, we would have had a Mid-Suffolk District Council Overview and Scrutiny Committee called at very short notice. That would be the way forward if there was a successful call-in. Of course, if it was in a Babergh call-in, then it would be the Babergh Overview and Scrutiny.
Unless, hypothetically, it was a matter of interest to both councils. Hypothetically, if it was a matter of interest to both councils, hypothetically, it would have been a joint.
Thank you. So we've dealt with all the bits and pieces that would be at the end of the agenda. We have only one item left on the agenda, I believe, and that is the information bulletin on the introduction of, or the continued introduction of, the universal credit.
Item 10.
Right. Okay. Yes, it's item. We're debating is whether it's item 9 or item 10. It's item 9. And officers, do you want to add anything to? Oh, Sorry, Cabinet Member would like to give an introduction. That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Although the number of universal credit claimants living in Babergh and mid-Suffolk properties is steadily increasing, the numbers are still relatively low. Despite this, universal credit claimants are accounting for a significant amount of the overall rent arrears in our stock. Universal credit has undoubtedly created some challenges for the housing service, with universal credit claimants and the Department of Work and Pensions requiring a different approach to the world of housing benefit. Challenges include the difficult administration problems that can accompany alternative payment arrangements, the difficulties posed by a national as opposed to local benefits system, and the limitations of the online landlord's portal. However, measures are being taken to improve performance and manage the risks associated with universal credit. These include a new income management policy, an ongoing project to improve our written communication with tenants, a greater focus on early intervention with new tenants and encouraging tenants to build up credit on their rent accounts. Although it is early days, improvements in overall collection performance in the last 2 quarters suggest that the changes are bearing fruit. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Can I thank the officers for a very comprehensive and detailed report, which is excellent, as was the last report that was presented. The officers are Lee Crowdell, who's the Tenant Services Corporate Manager, and Polly Behrman, the Tenant Services Professional Lead. Would either of you like to add anything to the information bulletin?
Just very quickly, I think Councillor Osborne summed it up very well. I think all I'd add really is that overall, I think team performance is very good, but universal credit is impacting, and I think as much as anything, it's a time issue for us, and the amount of additional time that managing universal credit claimants and their rent arrears is taking. But I think with our changes to the income management policy, we've started to see some progress, and I think overall we're quite happy with the work the team are doing. But I think it's really just for the committee to be aware that universal credit will continue to be an issue for us, and as the number of claimants increases, it will become increasingly challenging, I think.
So is it a gradual increase in workload on a sort of fairly straight line graph, or does it go up in fits and starts?
I would say it's been fairly steady so far. Looking at the increase from the February report to now, we've not seen a huge jump. It is kind of numbers that are manageable, I would say, at the moment. And I don't think we anticipate any great leaps at the moment. That is largely down to central government and their approach to the continuing rollout. But so far it's been fairly steady, I would say.
I'll invite members to comment or ask questions, but I think if there's any way that you feel that we can help in the work that you're doing, perhaps that could come out during the debate or the questioning. I mean, the reason that we're here is to see if there is anything that we as a committee or the broader councillors can do to help, because we acknowledge that you're in a fairly difficult position, but you appear to be managing it very, very well. Councillor Hadding, did you have that?
Great report, Lee. It's really comprehensive, and we completely understand all your problems, and it doesn't seem to be helping the fact that you're losing your service innovation leads and the whole problems with your landlord portals and stuff. I just have a question, and I'm probably being a complete idiot here, where you've got the what they called anyway, the appendix, in Appendix A, and you've got your universal credit rolled out by parliamentary constituency. What does it mean when it says your area ranked 34th?
So yeah, that's information I pulled off of I think, well, it's one of the central government websites, I can't remember which one, to be honest, but I think that's the rollout in terms of how far that constituency has progressed compared to all the other constituencies in the country. Oh, right, okay. I think that's what that refers to. Let me just, hang on. Yeah. Oh, sorry. It's in the region rather than, yes. Yeah.
It's the constituency, is that right?
Yes. Yeah, so if we're looking at the South Suffolk one, yeah, so 13th in the region, so in terms of how far the rollout has progressed, and then 186 in the country. So we can see with South Suffolk, actually, you know, they're some way behind, which from our perspective is a good thing.
Councillor McGraw.
Just propose that we do note the report. The only question arises is that because this is an ongoing situation, we received this report how long ago?
The last report was February.
So a 6-monthly basis appears to be what we're getting. And are you anticipating a great degree of percentage uptake in the next 6 months? Or should we delay such a report for, say, 12 months?
We're not anticipating a great leap in numbers, but I'm more than happy to produce reports on a 6-monthly basis if the committee find it useful.
That's my point exactly. I just don't know if there's any value to doing it at a 6-monthly interval if the difference is not going to be significant. It's quite clear that your team have it very well under control, as much as it is possible to have something that is not under your control in your control. You have done what you can. We can't add any more by examining every 6 months, so I would suggest that if you do see any marked deterioration, at that point it could be brought back to overview and scrutiny, but I don't see any need for us to ask for a further report unless that does happen.
That's precisely what I was going to suggest, yes. Do we need a proposal and a seconder for that, or do we just say that we'll put it in the workload work stream for 12 months' time? Thank you very much, but do come to us, and if any one individual can help in a particular area, do seek us out, and I'm sure that if we have any problems, we know who to come to. But thank you very much for the report. Thank you for the work that you are doing. Councillor Osborne.
Yeah, if I could just add another point to that. I think before the introduction of universal credit, and first in Sudbury and then into Stowmarket, there was a working group that was set up to learn lessons from previous areas where it had been introduced. And I think that creative and proactive way of working was one of the reasons we are where we are today, and that the team are managing it really well. And this income management policy as well, on the emphasis on intervention, is also very useful in dealing with these issues. So I think the team have really got it under control as much as is possible to be under control. I think it's worth remembering as well, as if anybody contacts you in your ward, before, when it was local, somebody could phone up at one of our offices and they would talk to the benefits team and they would be able to sort it out there and then. But because it's now done by another department, it's much more difficult to deal with that. So that caused extra stress and extra workload for the team as well. So the fact that you're recommending that a report only comes back when an issue is raised is very useful, because obviously there's work involved in coming to scrutiny and officers' time. So I thank the scrutiny committee for that recommendation.
And I think, have we finished now? Yes, thank you very much for your attendance. That is the end of the meeting. The meeting is closed. But I think
just because I brought in a rich fruit cake, because it's my birthday today. So if anyone wants a bit of cake, we can have it with coffee.